Welcome. I'm Philip M. Bailey, and this is States of America with USA Today. On this episode, we'll review the vice presidential debate. Did it move the needle? And what's up with the next debate? Is President Trump going to show up? He's pledging to skip the next one after it was announced the discussion with Joe Biden would be virtual. Also, moderating ain't easy. A look at how our own Susan Page did refereeing the beat candidates. Stay with us. Will President Trump show up at the next debate? Here to discuss is Anna Ashbrenner, 2020 elections editor at USA Today, and Eva McKend, congressional correspondent for Spectrum News. Ladies, how are you?
Doing well.
Good, thanks.
Let me start with both of you and by asking, Eva, let me start with you. Are you surprised that the president has said, at least for now, that he is not going to attend the debate in Miami because the Debates Commission said, we're going to do this virtually? Is that a surprise to you, someone who covers him pretty intimately?
No, this doesn't surprise me at all. We know that he believes that he thrives in atmospheres where he can be combative, and it's hard to do that online. It's hard to do that when there's a moderator with a mute button. So this does not surprise me at all that he is pushing back and saying, listen, I would rather do a rally. But, you know, he has tested positive for COVID. He has COVID-19. So this is something that people have the commission has to take into consideration, and understandably why they want to hold off on an in-person debate for now.
Right. I mean, and for historical perspective, we've done a virtual debate in presidential debates before. Back in 1960, Richard Nixon was in, I believe, Los Angeles, and John F. Kennedy was in New York. And that was all the way back in 1960. So we've done virtual debates before. Anna, let me ask you, do you think the president's going to stick with this, right? I mean, one thing President Trump loves are ratings, right? And there's a possibility that Joe Biden could simply show up with Steve Scully on his own in Miami and have the 90 minutes to himself. Do you think the president's going to stay committed to this, not showing up for the debate, or could he change his mind as he's often known to do?
I think it's really hard to know at this point. I'm curious to find out just how much contact the commission has had with both campaigns about this decision and what those conversations have looked like. But I think, you know, Eva's right, and you're right. He does like ratings. He likes to be combative. He likes to have that in-person interaction. I also think that he is probably thinking a little bit about what he said to folks earlier, that, you know, you can't let COVID control your life or take over. And so what does it look to, you know, his supporters if he says, sure, you know, I'll agree to these accommodations for this virtual debate after, you know, just a few days ago telling people they shouldn't change their lives.
Right. And I mentioned the changing of the mind because the president said a few days ago, we're going to call off these negotiations for COVID-19 relief package. We're not going to do that until after I'm reelected. And now we find out that Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin are basically still having conversations about relief. So it's possible that this could all change. For both of you, I guess, in terms of having a debate where the president might not show up, does that pretty much cancel any sort of interest in the debate? Or is there still, this would basically turn into a Joe Biden town hall, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, I think Vice President Biden is very much not interested in that. He doesn't want to be criticized for being afraid to go up against the president. So I think a statement that we got from the campaign indicates that he's willing to hold some type of forum with people to answer questions in a town hall setting on that date, but that he very much wants to debate the president again moving forward.
Anna, let me ask you, I mean, same question to you. I mean, do we suspect that Joe Biden wants to have this stage to himself? Would he take advantage of that?
I think if it does stay that they are not going to do this debate, I think you'll probably see Joe Biden do something that's more like a town hall that we've seen him do before, where he's still interacting with voters. There's, you know, a host or moderator there, but not just him one-on-one with another moderator. The campaign said earlier that they would like to move the town hall style debate to the next debate that's scheduled October 22nd. But I don't think the commission is interested in keeping that format for the third debate. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Joe Biden kind of do his own version of a town hall on October 15th if the president decides that he isn't going to do this debate.
Right. And again, as Eva mentioned, I mean, the president has tested positive for COVID-19. I don't think the commission wants the idea of maybe someone else being infected. Do we know if the commission consulted with the respective campaigns, Biden and Trump, before making this announcement today? It seemed as if they sort of made the announcement. Did the Trump campaign know? Were there negotiations saying, hey, this is going to be virtual? Or was this a surprise for the campaigns?
It sounded like it was a surprise. It sounded like to both of them. And maybe they did that for the purpose of keeping the entire process sort of objective. They didn't want to maybe consult one camp before the other. So it seems like they were very much in the dark, and they learned when the rest of us learned.
Well, Eva and Anna, I want you all to stick around. When we come back, we're going to talk about that veep debate and how things went down. It wasn't as nasty as the presidential, but it certainly had some fisticuffs.
If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation.
The veep debate was more traditional than the first presidential debate, that's for sure. But it had its fair share of fisticuffs. Returning with us is Anna Ashbrenner, 2020 elections editor at USA Today, and Eva McKind, congressional correspondent for Spectrum News. Ladies, let me ask, when it comes to the vice presidential debate, this reminded me of the 2012 debate, right? We haven't had a traditional debate in a long time. Donald Trump has sort of changed the way we look at American debates. Was this a snooze fest, or were you all impressed with some newsworthy items between Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence? And what were those news items you sort of took from this conversation?
Well, I'm not going to say I was impressed, because I sort of went into it knowing that that Senator Harris, that Vice President Pence have very different styles than former Vice President Joe Biden and President Trump. So I already knew that this was going to be a little bit more measured, a little bit more substantive, a little bit more normal. But I will say the big takeaway for me is all of the questions that went unanswered. We still don't know what Democrats are going to do when they're facing what is likely going to be a majority conservative court with the ascension of Amy Coney Barrett. We don't know what their next course of action is going to be. Are they going to try to add more justices to the court? How will they go up against what is probably going to be some huge policy decisions on abortion and the Affordable Care Act?
Right. That was very interesting. That was a very interesting exchange for two reasons. I think you're right, Eva, that number one, the Vice President, Mike Pence, was certainly pressing Senator Harris on whether or not the Democrats or whether or not a Biden administration would pursue, packing the court. But I also thought it was interesting that Pence did not answer Moderator Susan Page, our very own Susan Page's question about would he go for an outright ban on abortion in Indiana. Anna, is there anything that struck you substantively from a policy standpoint in this exchange, in this debate? For me, I think the number one thing I noticed was that Senator Harris was very adamant about not being interrupted at several points, telling the Vice President, I'm speaking, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking, right? And I think you and I had talked about her as a woman of color especially. How does she have to assert herself? Will she be likable enough? Is that an unfair question because women are often judged differently? What did you take out of that exchange?
I thought there might have been some strategy behind that. I felt like there were a couple times where Senator Harris let the vice president sort of keep going or talk over her a little bit and very calmly, tried to interject, I'm speaking. I wondered a couple times if that was a message to women voters of, I'm experiencing something a lot of you have experienced probably in your life, which is a man talking over you. So I thought that was probably strategic. I do think, you saw last night, there were several tweets, Senator Chuck Grassley, I believe, or Giuliani talking about, Mike Pence was more likable. I'd rather have dinner with him. The comments that you saw in a Frank Luntz focus group were really gendered, were really in some ways common things that you hear, particularly when people have this stereotypical sort of like angry Black woman stereotype that they want to fit someone into. So I think you did see that in some of the reactions last night, when I thought, for the most part, Harris kept cool in those times when Mike Pence was interjecting.
I'm certainly going to pay attention to not interrupting either one of you at this particular moment. Let me ask you about that, Eva. As a woman of color who is covering Congress, right? this conversation about likability. I saw some very harsh and just straight up sexist and just rude language aimed at Senator Harris, calling her the B word, saying this is an example. I think Ann Coulter actually tweeted out, conservative commentator Ann Coulter said on Twitter today, this is a prime example of affirmative action gone wrong. You know, Elizabeth Warren should have been the running mate. Bernie Sanders should have been the running mate. Basically anybody but Senator Harris should have been. What are particularly African-American women voters thinking and reacting to last night's, the vice presidential debate between Senator Harris and the vice president?
Well, we know that Black women entered this debate with a lot of enthusiasm. I know that Black female staffers on the Hill were organizing to be really active on social media in support of Senator Harris. She had to go into this striking a very difficult balance. She, as was mentioned, she knew that she had to push back against Vice President Pence, but in a way that didn't make so many people that still see these interactions through a gendered lens uncomfortable. And I think that she did the best that she could in that regard, and it actually tone-wise kind of worked. The I'm speaking, the sort of shade looks that she gave to Vice President Pence. That might have angered the right, but I know that it probably resonated with Black women and those on the left.
Let's shift to the moderator, our very own Susan Page. This is not a job that I envy for her or for Chris Wallace, Steve Scully, or whoever, Kristen Welker, whoever else will do these debates in the future, if we even have them. Do both of you as journalists think that we need to have moderators? I heard a lot of folks criticizing Susan's handling of the debate, particularly from the left, much in the same way I heard people from the right criticizing Chris Wallace. Everyone works the referee, right? No one is ultimately happy with the job. It's the most thankless job probably in politics. But are we at a point where we don't even need a moderator, or maybe should really revamp and have a mute button? I don't think that campaigns or candidates would agree to a debate giving a journalist a mute button.
You know, I think that we still very much need moderators. I don't envy the job either. It is a very difficult job when you know that you are trying to get through a number of issues to get into a back and forth with someone who's not answering a question. I've been in that position where I have a limited amount of time. I'm trying to interview Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for instance. He's not answering my question, but if I push on that, then I don't get to a number of other issues. The criticism of her would have been, well, she didn't talk about climate change if she didn't get to that climate change issue
right
at the end. So it's really an impossible task. And I think that she did a remarkable job, and that it actually speaks volumes when people don't answer the question. You know, we all see what that means when they're not answering a question. Right. And that also says something. Good
point. Anna, Susan is our colleague. We work with her. She was getting a lot of criticism for saying, Mr. Vice President, please, Mr. Vice President, sort of, pleading with him to sort of obey the rules that were in place. Both of them interrupted each other, Senator Harris and Vice President Pence. But I believe the count was that Pence did it a little bit more than Senator Harris did. Is this an impossible job for someone to do, even as someone as esteemed as Susan Page?
I think in a lot of ways it is. When I saw some of the criticism, and obviously there was a lot of people complimenting Susan as well, my question is always, what more did folks want her to do? Did they want her to personally stand up and turn his mic off? Or I know Chris Wallace raised his voice a couple times in the first debate to try and calm those candidates down. But I was trying to just think about, what more could she have actually done to steer it the direction that she wanted it to go? I thought she did a very good job. And I think, Eva's right. It does speak volumes, the questions that weren't answered about both candidates. I think specifically the second question about health transparency, and both Senator Harris and Vice President Pence pivoted that question almost totally away from the conversation around, the age of both Trump and Biden.
Well, Anna Ashbrenner, Eva McKind, ladies, thank you for joining me here on States of America with no interruptions. Thanks for joining me. Stick with us when we have a conversation with our very own Susan Page about how she handled the vice presidential debate.
It's not an interview. It's not a news conference. It's a debate.
So as you just heard, our very own Susan Page moderated the vice presidential debate. Well, she had a conversation with USA Today editor-in-chief Nicole Carroll right after to talk about what happened. Here's that interview.
First of all, the candidates got 2 minutes uninterrupted to answer the original question that I posed to them. And when that time ran out, which they could see on their camera, they could see a yellow light at 30 seconds and a red light when their time was up. I counted to 3 to give them time to finish. And then I began to say, thank you, Mr. Vice President, or thank you, Senator Harris, thinking it would prompt them to stop. It didn't always prompt them to stop. So sometimes I said it over and over again. We didn't have a mic switch to cut off their mics. Don't know that that would have been a good idea in any case, but I felt the only thing I could do was to interject that his time was up.
Do you wish you'd had a mic switch?
No, I don't think I don't. Everything about a debate tells voters something. So with both candidates, and especially with Vice President Pence, they didn't address the question that I asked. And that is frustrating to me because I spend a lot of time writing those questions. But that is illuminating in its own way to voters. And that was the point. It's not an interview. It's not a news conference. It's a debate. So the goal of a debate is different, and your agenda in a debate is different. And whereas in a news conference or an interview, I would have followed up and said, you didn't answer my question, that was not, I thought, the appropriate thing to do in a debate.
What does it feel like when they just don't listen?
So, I tried to think this through beforehand and about what the goal was and how you get to the goal. And I had to restrain my normal reporter instincts, which would have been to interrupt him during the 2 minutes when I said he wouldn't be interrupted and say, no, that's not the question I asked. And of course, on that question, the question of presidential disability, neither one of them answered the question. So I'm pretty sure neither one of them perhaps have had this discussion with their principal, which was the question I was asking. But that's illuminating for voters too. I thought it was a problem in the first debate and that the candidates, especially President Trump, didn't follow the rules that had been arranged beforehand, and it made a very unsatisfying experience for voters. I mean, I've tried to keep in mind that these debates are designed to help voters. They're not for the news media, they're not for the candidates or for the voters. And it struck me that that was not helpful to voters. So in the week since the first presidential debate, I tried to think about how can you have a different kind of conversation. And one way was to take a little bit of time at the beginning to say, here are the rules that you have agreed to and that I'm going to try to enforce. We had 8 segments. We didn't get through 9. It became clear at about the 1 hour mark that we were running late. We'd run over on several of the segments. And I dropped one of the topics, which was immigration.
How did you come up with the questions? I mean, you had the whole world to choose from, and you had 90 minutes to do it. How did you winnow down your questions?
So I wanted to keep voters in mind. So I tried to ask about issues that voters care about. So there are issues that Washington journalists care about. There are issues that congressional correspondents care about that are not necessarily issues that resonate with voters. So I tried to ask about questions that resonate in voters' lives. And so coronavirus, definitely the economy, of course, racial justice, an important issue, the Supreme Court. That's what I tried to keep in mind in choosing the topics. And in drafting the questions, I tried to get questions that would get them to say, I tried to draft very narrow questions to try to get an answer. This was perhaps less successful than I'd hoped.
Don't leave us just yet. Courtney Supermania is going to come back with us to talk about President Trump's COVID-19 positive test, his visit to Walter Reed Hospital, and what this all means for the country facing the pandemic.
Dr. Conley did say he's not out of the woods yet.
Courtney, let me ask you at the outset here, going into the vice presidential debate. President Trump made a huge bit of news by testing positive for COVID-19. Give me, I guess, the historical ramifications of that. The president of the United States, right, was infected with the same pandemic that has devastated the world, halted the country's economy, and killed about 210,000 people. What did that do to this campaign?
Well, I think it poses a huge challenge for the president and his campaign. They have spent majority of the last 6 months really trying to move the narrative, the narrative on from the pandemic, talk about really anything but the coronavirus. And the fact that the president has tested positive, there is a current outbreak at the White House. Several aides have tested positive in recent days since his diagnosis, really puts the coronavirus front and center, in this election. And I think, especially, raises questions about the president's leadership on the pandemic, and as well as the vice president, considering he is the head of the coronavirus task force.
Right.
So, Democrats, have seized on this messaging, saying if the president can't protect himself, how can he protect you and your family? And so this is a big moment. We've already seen the Trump campaign try to reshape the messaging on that and say, well, this president has, struggled with coronavirus. Joe Biden hasn't, and therefore, he's more qualified.
Yeah, I saw that the spin from the White House being that the president, now that he's been diagnosed or caught COVID-19, he's more relatable to Americans who've had the disease. What is the status of the president's health? I mean, was he on oxygen at any point? Has that been confirmed? What's his health now? Is he out of the forest as far as COVID-19 is concerned, the symptoms? What's his health status currently?
Yeah, well, we heard from the president's medical team over the weekend. They were a bit evasive early on about whether he received supplemental oxygen. They did confirm on Sunday that he did have 2 incidents where his blood oxygen levels dropped, and he did receive supplemental oxygen. They did put him, as a result, on the steroid dexamethasone. And he has also finished up his 5-day course yesterday of the antiviral drug remdesivir. He's continuing to take that steroid. He was released from Walter Reed on Monday, just 3 days after he was admitted.
Was he released on his own, or was he released on his own, Courtney, or did he make the decision, I'm leaving, or did his doctor say you can leave? How did that go down?
Yeah, reporters really pressed his main physician, Dr. Sean Conley, and Dr. Conley said, no, we made this decision as a team. We decided that his condition is he's progressing well enough that he can go home and go back to the White House, where he'll have, 24/7 world-class care. They can replicate a hospital environment in the White House, and they had said, that's why they're comfortable sending him home. But Dr. Conley did say he's not out of the woods yet. A critical part of a coronavirus case is the first 7 to 10 days. And according to the timeline they have since given us, that would be Monday, October 12th. So he did say, we have to get to Monday to see if he's over the hump here. And that also comes right before his next presidential debate with Joe Biden on October 15th.
The one bit of news that President Trump did make, Courtney, was that he announced he's pulling his aides and the White House out of the negotiations for a second round of stimulus for a relief package surrounding COVID-19. Number one, did that come as a surprise to you? And basically, the president announced that we're going to do this after I win the election, almost like sort of using a carrot to say, if I win the election, we can keep doing this, but if not, maybe we won't go forward with stimulus or relief package for COVID-19. Was that a bit of a surprise to you? And how did Senate Republicans, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, how did they respond to the president's sort of abrupt announcement via Twitter?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a political whiplash over the last day. The president has been tweeting nonstop. And then yesterday afternoon, as you mentioned, we saw a tweet from him abruptly announcing that he was abruptly, pulling out of negotiations over, stimulus bill, which is quite puzzling considering, the Trump campaign's main message going into this election has been the president's record on the economy. So you would think that he would want to continue talks and try and get some cash in the pockets of voters before Election Day. The president's tweet did send the markets into a frenzy. They dropped sharply right before close. And we know the president uses the markets as an indicator of how he's doing. So it was quite puzzling yesterday, but we did see him walk that back later on. Last night, he said that, Congress must act immediately on, individual stimulus bills. And he did say that he would be willing to sign some of these individual bills that he had previously said he wouldn't. So we've seen a sort of an about face turn from the president since that tweet yesterday.
Courtney Subramanian, the USA Today White House reporter, thank you very much for joining us here.
Thank you, Philip.
Thanks for joining us on States of America, where we're having honest conversations about the issues that matter most.